when you look at other communities, they understand that the more you live, the more you understand your place in belonging, and the more that you can then help the younger ones and our older people in, I think, in Western society, and often seen as, the younger people telling them what to do and kind of, again, containing them.
You're listening to the Brave OT podcast with me, Carlin Naik. This podcast is all about empowering occupational therapists to step up, level up, blaze some trails, and maybe engage in a little conscious rebellion in service of our profession, our clients, our work, our businesses, and living our mission wholeheartedly. We are all about keeping it real, doing hard things, unhustling, being curious, exploring, growing through our challenges, and finding joy, fulfillment, and vitality as we do so. Really, we're OTing ourselves and each other. I hope you love this episode. I'm absolutely thrilled to share with you my interview with Alice Hortop. She's a trailblazing OT in the UK. She's a senior OT lecturer and program lead for the apprenticeship OT degree program at the University of the West of England. And she's also a sea swimmer. She has a minibus camper named Violet, and she is a whole heck of a lot of fun. Alice and I met this fall in the UK, and I really admire the way she embraces humor, mental health concepts, and the way she challenges the status quo. One of the values that underpins the Brave OT podcast is conscious rebellion. I would say that Alice's way of being in the OT community is really characterized by conscious rebellion. She's curious. She questions the status quo. She mulls it over, turns it inside out, asks really good questions, and then shares other ideas for consideration to the OT community. And I just love it. I hope you enjoy this deep dive into discussing belonging-centered practice, as well as a few delightful tangents along the way. Thank you, Alice, very much. We have Alice Hortop here today, and I'm so excited that you're here. We met at the OT Wellbeing Retreat in the UK just a month ago. It was, I think, just over a month ago, and it was such a treat to, yeah. And we were camping, and we got to do some presenting together and some organizing together, along with Wendy and Lucy, and that was so much fun to meet the OTs in that setting, and such a casual vibe.
It feels like such a long time ago already. We need to have these things far more often.
Perhaps monthly.
Yes, at least. Maybe weekly.
Maybe weekly.
Yeah, maybe daily. In fact, isn't work overrated? I think maybe this 2-day work a week thing would be good.
That would be a nice occupational balance. I would think that, we love what we do, but I feel like I do it better when I'm not overdoing it.
That would be excellent.
Speaking of what we do, you work at the University of West England, and you just got a promotion to program lead for the apprenticeship OT degree program. Is that correct?
Yeah, I did literally yesterday.
Yesterday, so congratulations!
Exciting and scary in equal measures. Because already I've been after forms, and it's like, oh no, not forms, anything but forms.
And will you still be lecturing then?
Yeah, I'll be doing lots of lecturing. It's they give you so many, we call them bundles. So you get so many bundles allocation, but I'll still be working on the full-time course, and I'll still be working on the apprenticeship course. It's just my work will be more dominated towards the apprenticeship route, which is really exciting because it's a new kind of way of getting qualified as an OT in the UK.
Okay, can you tell me more about that? I'm not familiar.
Yeah, basically they wanted to make it easier for people to access the training when they had different lifestyles. So if they weren't able to just go in as a regular student, they had families, they had work lives, they needed to keep an income coming in and things. And also we really wanted to pull on the rich kind of skills that people have in practice. And I'm sure you've got loads of people who you've seen, you think, oh my goodness, they would make the best OT. Yeah. And they may not have the kind of availability of resources to do it at that point. So you can actually work whilst you train. So it's a bit like we used to call it the in-service route, but actually the employers pay for the person to train, and then the person has a certain amount of loyalty towards the employer afterwards.
Right.
So yeah, they basically pay for the person to work part-time and do the training, and part-time and work, but the bonus is they get an increasingly more qualified member of staff who then influences everyone around them, and they use their training on the job then to enhance their training as well. So it's a two-pronged kind of feed in, and the apprenticeships students are absolutely lovely. They're all really motivated, gorgeous, mature people with experience, and every time you kind of give an example and they'll come back with another example, and it's really lovely, rich learning. They're an absolute pleasure to be with. I think it's a really good route, and when they get to mix with our students on the full-time course, which sometimes, again, they might have families, they might have experiences of relatives with different kind of human differences and challenges, but sometimes they don't.
Right.
So for the younger students, it's a great mix to find out different ways into the programme. And I think it really helps with diversity.
Yes. Oh,
because
yes.
otherwise, only people who can't do the training unless they've got a certain income or, certain set of life circumstances.
Yes. Oh, that's really, really interesting. And do you know of programs in other countries doing this, or is this unique to the UK or even to your university?
I'm not. Oh, it's definitely not unique to the university.
Okay.
Most areas are being asked to do apprenticeship programs now. We have a shortage of OTs in the UK, so it's they're thinking far more innovatively. How do we use the resources that we already have?
Yeah.
We used to do masses of in-service training, and then there was a change in kind of beliefs about how that was funded and how long it took to fund. And then I think with hindsight, the government realised that actually this made a really great stock of OTs who were made slightly different practitioners that really were rich in experience and were beneficial. I don't know whether other countries train people in the same way. I'm not sure. I haven't heard of it in America.
No, and I haven't heard of it in Canada either. I'd be curious to know a little bit more because I think I think I really see what you're saying too. I know when I went to university for OT, it was a bachelor's degree, and so there were sort of about half of my cohort did really well in their first year of sort of introductory courses and got in right away. They may or may not have had jobs yet, and at any jobs yet. And then there was about half of us who already had a degree, and either it took us a while to get in, or we came to it later, but in any case, most of us had been working, along the way, had been volunteering, had been doing things, so we came with a different life experience. And interestingly, I would imagine that split, we might have had the lower marks in the class too, but that experience adds a richness, right? And having everybody together everybody can learn together, which is wonderful. I think that's brilliant.
It's really interesting that it kind of works both ways, doesn't it?
Yeah.
That actually almost having people with no experience is really, really important, because that reminds us there's something called what do they call it? The knowledge burden, or the curse of knowledge. And once you know something, your ability to be able to take something down to its simplest parts and understand it from point of view of somebody who's never heard of it becomes more and more difficult. So the more of an expert you are, the harder and harder it is to imagine not knowing this knowledge. They do an experiment called the tappers, and they get people to tap out a tune. But whilst they do the tapping, they're hearing the tapping, but they're hearing the tune in their head. And that's what we're doing. We're tapping out a tune, but we have occupational therapy playing in our head.
Yes.
So for us, it seems so attainable and easy, but we really need the people who don't have that experience, because they ask the right questions. They ask the kind of maybe slightly naive questions, and they take you back to actually what is this core concept? What is the steps we need to get here? And actually, when you're in a room, there's always a new perspective that you can get. And I think whenever you go back to basics, you always learn something new. It's like TED Talks. I listen to a TED Talk and I think, wow, that's amazing. And I hear all these things. And then I listen again, I hear something different. And I listen again. And every time I get new knowledge and I listen to something, I think, oh, that's interesting. That's a different perspective. So having that rich diversity is so important. I love that.
Yeah. Oh, that's really cool. That's really cool. And there's that beginner's mindset, that openness to growth and learning, and no assumption that you know anything creates an openness, right? Whereas when we get our egos in the way, or our knowledge in the way, that sometimes we are less open to possibilities. We're eliminating extraneous variables all over the place.
Yeah, absolutely. There's something beautiful about not knowing and literally starting at the beginning. And there's equally something beautiful about having an example that suddenly makes something pop to life for somebody.
Yeah.
It's a really nice place to be. I love it. I love learning, and I love helping the students learn and blossom into the person that they can be. I think that's really important, not making mini-me's. Because I think that's what happens sometimes. We have an idea about what we think an occupational therapist should be. And it's about helping them become the best occupational therapist they can be and they want to be. Obviously, we got, fitness to practice.
Sure.
But within that, there's huge diversity in what occupational therapists might look like.
Which is so juicy. A passion of yours is belonging-centered practice. And so I'm thinking about these individuals who think, oh, well, I don't belong here. I've been, working as a cashier for 10 years, or I don't belong here. I don't have any life experience, or and it really, I can hear your value of belonging in the way, in inclusivity, and in the way you're talking about these individuals and embracing who they are for what they are, and that their uniqueness, that they all belong here with all of their uniquenesses. Tell me a little bit more about belonging-centered practice, what that means to you.
Basically, it was a long journey to get here.
Okay.
I did lots of reading about cognitive dissonance, and I'd been doing lots of reading generally. I love to read. And I suddenly found out about this concept of cognitive dissonance. So this idea that you're so used to thinking the way you're thinking that you don't even understand that there is a difference, that actually you're so used to being told that this is the right practice that you don't even question the practice. And it made me think about, okay, if I was to turn everything that I know about OT upside down, to invert it and ask what the opposite of that would be, and to test it, then that would make me more certain in ensuring that I was on the right path. Right. So one of the things they suggest with cognitive dissonance is that you invert it. What was the opposite of this? And then you see if there's any value in it. And then you kind of check yourself all the time. And I'd been basically reading lots of different books about lots of different subjects. I mean, so varied and wide. And I literally went through, well, what are the core things that occupational therapists believe? And one of the first ones obviously came to mind is person-centered practice. And I was like, well, that's amazing. There can't possibly be anything that would be better than person-centered practice. That's just nonsense. Okay, so what's the opposite of person? People. Okay, well, I suppose there is value in group work and things like this. And okay, and I'd read some work on neoliberalism and how basically in kind of more westernized countries, we had become more focused towards productivity as a value, and how we had become more individualistic. And I hadn't really considered that in a very kind of negative way. And having worked in dementia care and seen how important it was that you understood the individual, I hadn't really kind of considered in a broader way the kind of wider need for belonging. I thought looking at the individual was right. And when I looked at, well, the opposite of person-centered practice would be, and I went through lots of different words, and I finally came up with the belonging-centered practice, that actually we looked at not just the person, but the people around the people. And I didn't mean just family. I meant the core people, or where weren't the core people. And I don't mean just lip service, because I think we do a lot of lip service to it.
Yes.
I mean in a proper way of, who are those people's chosen kin? Who are those people's kind of roles they would have wanted in their life? I was raised by an occupational therapist, and she used to tell me on a regular basis that her biggest priority for me was to be independent. And I was always independent. I was independent no matter what went on. I was independent and I was proud of it. And when I couldn't have children, I got very depressed. And I basically fought the depression a lot until I couldn't get out of bed. And I realised that actually I'd been kind of suppressing this deep loneliness, because when other people have children, they tend to socialise with other people that have children.
True.
And you suddenly find yourself, as you age, getting lonelier and lonelier and lonelier as all your friends disappear. And for a period of time, I was actually thinking, gosh, I need to change my personality. I'm clearly not, somebody who people want to be around. I must be really irritating, because all these people are just slowly ghosting me.
Yeah.
That's the term we use in the UK.
And you're so not irritating, by the way. You're a joy to be around.
Tell my partner that, please. Write it on a postcard so I can put it somewhere. She isn't irritating. That's not.
I mean, probably sometimes, but we only spent a weekend together. So
and I kind of realized that when I did some more research, I did my master's dissertation on involuntary childlessness, that actually all these other women suddenly noticed that people were disappearing. And then the conversations that were happening around you, you felt like there was an invisible wall, because they all were talking about children and you didn't have that. And actually it's what you wanted, so it was even harder. And feeling that kind of isolation kind of was another layer of understanding that actually independence isn't the only thing we strive for. We're all interdependent, we're all connected. And I started looking at people all around the world and how they kept well. And I did a presentation called The Paradoxical Need for Social Connection and Disconnection, Challenging the Connection Bias. And it was based on this idea that actually we're so overconnected that actually sometimes we need to disconnect. But when I looked at polyvagal theory, I realized that actually the reason I'd needed to disconnect was that I was so busy being independent that I couldn't actually ask for help at all. So the only way I could try and help myself was to take myself away for a period of time and work on what would my life be without children. And if I'm really honest, I probably wouldn't have been so desperate for children if I'd had a sense of belonging, because I wasn't dependent on my family, I wasn't interdependent on my family, I wasn't connected with my family. Actually, I come from a very dysfunctional family. I was desperate to create my own belonging and I couldn't. So it was all these kind of experiences came together, and then I started thinking, well, actually a lot of the people I work with are very lonely and isolated. A lot of people can't co-regulate. Actually, why are we so disconnected as a society? And I'm thinking, well, the government told us, Margaret Thatcher in the UK told us that she wanted to change society's hearts and minds. She said there is no society. There is man, there's woman, there's child, there's neighbour, but there is no society. She said that in a statement.
Wow.
And everything became tailored, including occupational therapy, towards the individual.
Wow.
So belonging-centered practice is a bit of a pushback, really. It's trying to, because a lot of my generation, I'm 44 and I'm an OT and I'm a Thatcher child. That's what you call me. I'm a Thatcher child. I was born in the Thatcher era. I'm thinking, well, most people who are in practice are brought up in a Thatcher era, and maybe they might be thinking like me, not understanding the importance of having a broader perspective on the individual. And I kind of see that when we work with people, I imagine a children's mobile. So say you had an animal one, a zoo or something, and at the moment we have all these animals, we pick one, so we pick the tiger and we pull it. And that's us doing our intervention. And all the other mobile bits move, except we're not really kind of considering them in a real way. We talk about it, we talk about social context, but we talk about the individual's social context. We don't really talk about actually how is that carer going to cope, how are they going to be able to live their life. And you know, human differences don't affect just one person. They affect you know, whole groups of people. And when I became a sea swimmer, I'm a big sea swimmer, and we got a massive group, I really felt a sense of belonging. And I understood that that was because of lots of factors, things like reciprocity. You have to look out for each other to keep each other safe. You share tips, you share information. And I realised these were all the things that mothers do. Mothers check their children are safe, they check their other children are safe, they share tips on how to get children to bed at night, they share resources like car shares and all those things. And I suddenly had all those things I've been missing for years from a sea swimming group, which I'd never expected. It was like, what?
Wow.
Where did this come from?
Yes.
And then I thought, this has to be analysed. This just needs to be understood. So I went around the world and looked at all these different communities of belonging and what made them feel well, what made them feel so well, what created this huge wellness.
Yes.
And this idea, nearly every single one of them has similar themes that go through, things like legacy. There's a really beautiful book called Braiding Sweetgrass.
Yes, I've heard of that one.
It's absolutely delightful, and she's a botanist, and she's an aspiring poet, and the way she writes is so melodic and evocative, and it's just literally delicious. You just want to eat it. It's so lovely. And she talks about, you know, the idea of what an indigenous population is, and because their origin story is the sky woman falls from the sky and is caught by the geese and is rested on the geese until because the earth is all sea, and it's a story about basically how they create Turtle Island. It's really beautiful. But because they come from the sky world, all people are immigrants. And if all people are immigrants, what makes an endogenous person? And an endogenous person is somebody who cares about the land that they're in and thinks about the future, and that's their definition. And I thought that's really beautiful, that actually part of belonging is legacy, caring about the community you're in, and thinking about like the Maori people, they think about they consider themselves chains through time. And the person who is alive at that moment is the person in the sun. And they have to strengthen the chain of the past behind them, but they're thinking about how they increase the strength of the chain going forward. But they're a chain that goes through time. There's so many beautiful, evocative kind of ideas about what belonging is. And none of them describe fitting in. Which I find really interesting as an OT, but also unique.
Yeah.
And why?
Because that's what comes to mind first, is fitting in when you hear belonging. Yeah.
We do it. Social skills training. What is social skills training? It's training people to
be more like the others. Yes. And we do have an innate urge to be like those we are around. It comes naturally, even if we're not trying, which is interesting. But then kind of looking at this belonging differently.
But are we all kind of doing that because of survival? And also things like materialism. You know, I don't know. Well, I think Western society very much pushes that if you have this and you have that, you'll be happy. And then that with technology and things, you never have everything.
No.
And then people say, I'll be happy when I have this car, and they have this car and they're not happy.
Happiness is just a little further down the road. When I get there, then I will be happy. But actually, when I'm there, I won't. I'll want something more.
Yeah. So this idea of materialism, and that actually isn't part of belonging at all.
No.
But we've taught it is. So this having the right outfit to success, you got dressed for success. Do you have to dress for success? When did this become a rule? It's really interesting how politics has really shaped how we belong and how we practice as occupational therapists. And my desire is to really go back and think about how we work with people in a more respectful, genuine, authentic, curious way, understanding trauma, understanding how people behave differently because of different reasons, and embracing them because of it, and to seeing their richness that they can bring, as opposed to this is a bit off topic now.
I like off topic. This is fun.
I do off topic. Yeah. Jennifer Krieg, Dr. Krieg, she recommended me a fabulous book called Radical Help. And in it, she gives the example, it's Hilary Cotton, who's a social activist. She gives the example of youth centres and youth clubs. And basically, again, I don't know, my initial thoughts are youth clubs, brilliant. Youth clubs, brilliant. Kids can go there, meet other youth. Yay, brilliant. And then
they're all the same age. They must belong.
Yeah. But actually, she analyses it with research, and it shows that actually certain youth clubs are really great for kids, particularly church-run ones, because parents tend to be very involved and they're very invested in it. It tends to be people from better socioeconomic backgrounds tend to go there. But actually, youth clubs set up in areas of deprivation and poor socioeconomic kind of stability and things, they have poorer outcomes. And actually, when you look at all the kind of life success, they tend to do worse from going to a youth club, which I found really shocking.
Yeah.
I mean, not all of them, but some of them. And I was like, how can this be? And Putnam, who he wrote Bowling Alone back in 2001, he talks about bonding relationships and bridging relationships. And bonding relationships, and those kind of deep friendship ones and bridging ones, are ones where you learn how to interact in different ways. So you learn how to interact with diverse people and you make diverse connections. And what they've shown actually is most job outcomes and kind of success outcomes are more about who you know. And who you know is partly influenced by what you can do. If you can afford golf, if you can afford to do that activity, if you can afford to have that suit, if you can afford to kind of mix with different types of people. But I just think it's an area that occupational therapy could really look at, where we think sometimes we're doing the right thing, but are we always doing the right thing?
Right.
And actually what we're doing with these children is containing them, because we're afraid of what they'll do if we don't contain them.
Right.
And that's keeping kids off the street because we don't want them to do crime, etc. Yeah. But actually, is that really helping them, or is that for our benefit?
Right.
And I just find that if we look at anything with a surface kind of view and a surface eye, we won't see the full picture. And that's kind of where this research has come from, that I just think there's big questions to be asked about everything.
I love your curious approach. We share a lot of values around curiosity and authenticity and questioning things. I absolutely love a t-shirt that you were wearing at the retreat. And I wrote down the title. What does it say? Well-behaved women seldom make history. It's just that sense of, well, do I have to accept that? Let me just question that. Let's try the opposite. Let's explore from another angle. Let's not accept everything that's been sent our way. And I so appreciate that about you. Can you give an example of how an OT might use belonging-centered practice to think of something that we might commonly do and something we might do a little bit different if we're coming at it from that approach?
Yeah, there's lots. I think there's lots of ways that you can use belonging centered practice, but the one that kind of hits me in the face is things like the "This Is Me" pamphlets.
Okay. I don't think
And
I've seen those.
anyone with dementia in the UK has a "This Is Me"
Okay.
document, and that's them. So basically, when they can't remember important things like whether they're a vegetarian or whether they're religious or things that'll soothe them, then there's a document that they carry with them. And it's, why is it "This Is Me"? Why isn't it "This Is Us"?
Mm-hmm.
Because actually, when the wife is having a bad day, we ought to know things about her to help her be soothed, so that actually their relationship is stronger. And it's tragic if somebody with dementia isn't supported, but it's also tragic if somebody is heartbroken because that person who is the love of their life has got dementia, and their heart is breaking for that person, but they're also not able to cope as well. And it's also awful that maybe their daughter or their son or their neighbour who has been involved in their life for 20 odd years isn't being supported to understand what's happening. Or it's not just the person. It never is just the person. And that "This Is Me" doesn't capture it. We had an example when I worked in dementia care of, we were doing lots of activities with the clients, and the clients were doing fantastically well. They were having a really, really good time. They were all very person-centred. And my colleague did some gardening, and one of the clients ate a marigold seeds, or seeds. It's got quite a few seeds, actually. And we called the poison unit, and just so everyone knows, you can eat as many marigold seeds as you want, because you won't die. Just crack on, eat your marigold seeds. Crack on, no problem. We checked the poison unit, marigold seeds are safe. But we were quite concerned initially, and my colleague phoned the relatives to let them know, just because she felt a duty of care, to be honest. And they said, "Oh my God, what the hell was he doing gardening?" And they were like, "Oh, he gardens every week, and he dances, and he goes to baking." And they were like, "But he can't do anything." And it was like this, we haven't communicated. And actually, we were so busy being person-centred.
Right.
And because of GDPR, sorry, that's confidentiality in this data protection in our country is GDPR, you don't tell anyone anything without permission.
Right.
So if we'd have been communicating that actually your relative did X today and had a great time, this is what they learned, we don't want them going home and then being kind of quizzed on what they did, because with dementia, being quizzed on what isn't great.
Yeah.
However, for the person to know that actually their loved one didn't just go and sit in a day centre, bored all day, they had a rich, fulfilling day, that helps their mental health, and also helps them, inspire them to what they might want to be able to do at home. And that's the whole point, isn't it? So if we're saying, so we made these little notes saying, today I did X, Y, Z. And it was simple, easy, print them out. Whoever went to that group, tick box thing, did that. And it made a difference, because all of a sudden the relatives started thinking, oh, but maybe he could help with baking. Maybe she could do this. Oh, I get her to make the bed with me. And it creates ideas of possibility. But if you're only ever thinking that person in front of you, you just don't think that. So I think I hope they're two quite accessible ideas, because it doesn't take a lot. I had another one who a client we worked with did so well that his wife became unwell. And we hadn't considered the fact that actually her role was supporting him to the point of, we stole her role.
Yeah.
And we thought, oh, she's going to be so pleased.
Independence. Yes.
Yeah. And she suddenly went, geez.
You just took away her job, her primary.
What's the point in me?
Yeah. Wow.
So, whatever we do, it's the thing, it's if you work with somebody with addiction, you can't just take away the addiction and think, oh, well, there we go, fixed. There's always this repercussion.
The chain.
Chain. We're all chains.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. I'm in a room here too with so my aunt has dementia and I'm visiting. And I'm looking around this room, which is her sewing room. So this is a wall of fabric. I'm not in my closet. This is a wall of fabric on this side. There's another wall of fabric on that side. There's quilting materials, there's patterns. And I'm looking around and so my aunt doesn't use this room anymore. It's not something she can do, but I look around through the lens of belonging, and I see the fabric that she used to make each of her nieces and nephews and grandchildren a jacket that aligned with what they loved. So my eldest got a safari jacket. My nephew got a puppy jacket. My other one got a race car one, and all of these things. And I see all of those fabric remnants, and I see quilts she made for people. And I see she made my uncle suits. She made her own dresses. And over where she would sit mostly, I see her sister's phone numbers. I see all the notes and reminders she wrote for herself to remember to do certain things as her cognition was declining. I see photos of her sisters and her mother and her husband and her children and her grandchildren. And it's not about the sewing.
No.
No.
No, it's so much more.
Mm.
And all those beautiful things would make the richest reminiscence activity.
Yeah.
Whereby if you just went, oh, she really likes sewing, and you went and got a sewing kit that's been simplified for somebody with dementia, you would lose so much. And all those connections would be just gone. And it's so important. And I think quite often when they look at things like Simopi and they talk about the spirituality, and people quite often struggle with, well, if they're not religious, what's the spiritual?
Mm-hmm.
And it's the essence of somebody. It's their history. It's their connections. It's how that one person made them spark inside. It's all those things that make us human, which I think that's something that I think takes a while for the students to understand, to get in touch with this idea.
I think it takes a while for a human to understand that about themselves, almost a whole half lifetime.
And just, you're absolutely correct. And that's part of the other thing that I see in the belonging as well, that when you look at other communities, they understand that the more you live, the more you understand your place in belonging, and the more that you can then help the younger ones and our older people I think in Western society, and often seen as, the younger people telling them what to do and kind of, again, containing them. Mm-hmm. We contain anything we're not sure of.
Right.
And actually, they're the ones who get this huge amount of wisdom.
Yeah.
I feel like I know so much more. And I'm not putting young people down, because I've got students who are bright as buttons, who've got amazing insight, who are beautifully empathetic, who, are fantastic. But there is something that comes with experiences and being able to grow from experiences. It's a horrible thing to say sometimes, but when a student has a negative experience, I say, I'm so sorry. And then almost the next breath, that's going to make you a really good therapist.
Yes, it's so true. They can only see the screw up at the time, and they can't see it. Can we share a little bit about the funny thing we did at the retreat related to that?
Yeah, go for it.
So it was, and I don't remember because you guys did it last year when I wasn't involved, and so I'm sure the purpose was discussed more in advance. But it was very clear that the purpose of this F Up Cafe, or you called it a Beckett Cafe, right? It's an E instead of a U.
Yes. And it's far less rude, honestly. In the UK, it's far less rude. You just change it to an E, and it's an Irish kind of, because somebody can be feckless as well, and somebody can you can be in poor feckle, which means you're not well.
Yes.
So it does have other meanings.
So it seemed to be that we were trying to, people had an opportunity to tell stories about the times they've messed up. And what it appeared as a participant and observer was that the intention was to unhook a little bit, create some humor. We could all laugh together about these things that seemed like horrible mistakes at the time, and maybe have a bit of healing of our own. But also, I think next time you can go, oh yeah, I really messed this up.
but so and so survived that, and this was nowhere near as bad as that story that she told that night in the tent over gin.
Yeah, and I think it was started by a group of businessmen who are with, and they've actually franchised it. You can buy a franchise to set up your local. They call it something else. I call it the Irish version. And you can buy a franchise, and people go and tell stories where they've done small things, funny things, but also huge things, big errors. And it's about, this idea that we always are on show. We're always showing our best selves, and that's part of fitting in again, isn't it? But actually, isn't it refreshing for somebody to go, do you know, I'm absolutely useless at X. And there was this really good book by somebody, what was his name? I've forgotten his name now. He looked at music, and he looked at the history of music, and he looked at when people stopped singing. And it was at the time when they started making these big music halls, and all the best singers basically found jobs doing music in the music halls. And as soon as people started singing professionally, everyone else started feeling not professional, not
you have expert. To be good to sing, right? It's not just a human thing. You must be good.
No, everyone has to be good at everything. And it started this. And also, very much in the West, you sell your expertise. You get good at something to sell it. Everything is a commodity to be sold. Like people have said about me selling person-centered practice, I said that misses the point. The whole point is everyone should be able to belong. It's not me selling anything, and it's not mine. This is life lessons that we've all learned. This is looking at, that would be cultural appropriation to sell what I've learned. And we live in a society where we're trying to sell our expertise, and this really celebrates everything that we are in our human fallibility and actually our fragility. And there's within kind of other cultures, you look at Japanese culture and wabi-sabi and things like that. Probably pronounce everything wrong, just so everyone is aware at home. If you go and say anything I've said and think you've got the accurate pronunciation,
it's your accent.
Yes, it's an accent thing. It's not because I'm rubbish at this. They actually have they like artisan pieces because it's got the unique fingerprints, the people. It's
Maker's mark. Yes.
Yeah, you have the artisan where they're expert, but also the uniqueness of each one will not be the same because it's handmade, and that reflects nature. Each leaf is different. Each tree has a different angle, and there's beauty within those differences and nature. And then there's anti-fragile, which is part of belong-centered practice. But actually, what we tend to do is when something breaks, we just rebuild it, as opposed to seeing this as an opportunity to rebuild and regrowth. And actually everything that happens is an opportunity for growth and rebuilding. But why rebuild the same when you can rebuild better and stronger and wiser? And that's that kintsugi, where they break china, and they rebuild it with gold and silver,
highlight the cracks.
And it's more beautiful for being broken and being repaired, because now it's object and it's human. They've got a connection, and it's a reciprocity. That reciprocity has happened. And the native kind of indigenous populations, particularly Canada and America, have got beautiful connections. They said that in the book, they said that 70% of the English language is nouns, and only 30% are verbs, which are doing, whereby something like 70% of their language is verbs and only 30% is doing. And if you considered a relationship with things like the sea and things like the trees, and you actually thank them and realize what they gave you, then you'd be less likely to hurt them. You wouldn't just throw the rubbish in the sea, because actually the sea is alive. And actually, it is alive. I get different water every day, and it treats me differently, and it's linked to the moon, and we have tides change, and I think we've become very disconnected if we think our only relationships are with just other humans.
It's I want to have 10 conversations from here. And there are so many things that come to mind as you're talking about this. But one thing that comes to mind as a Canadian is that part of our reparation for the way the Indigenous people of Canada were harmed is that before any meeting, there's a gratitude to the land that we're on and who owned that land. And it's done. I mean, most of us, it's just become so normal that it's not appreciated. I feel like, oh yeah, we just do that. We're on this land and it's, of these people, and it's a formality that takes about 1 minute and then we're on with the meeting. And I really feel like we need to better understand that interbeing, interconnection, that belonging and all of that as a purposeful thing to truly make that a gratitude practice, not a formality. And quite often the person delivering it is doing it with a grateful heart, but very often the crowd doesn't understand. It's just one of those things we do because we wronged the people who own this land, and check, done, move on.
Yeah.
I'd like to learn more about that. Yeah.
Well, the lady who wrote the book is very, very clever, because she introduces you to ideas and then moves away and tells you a story about something else. And then she revisits the idea and she sinks it in a different way. And then she comes back and she begins with the Sky Woman story. And then she compares it to the origin story of Christianity. And it's not a criticism of Christianity, it's an understanding of how one is based on the earth saving the Sky Woman who's pregnant and has a child, and the other is based on original sin. So the apple that was given to Eve was sinful, but all the goods that were given to the Sky Woman were gifts. And because then she had the gift of everlasting life, the tree of life, she grabs it on the way down and takes some things. She brings seeds and things. And when her daughter dies, she then buries in the land, and you return to the land. And then from her, strawberries came from her heart, and they call them heart berries. And they're the leaders because they're the first to come. And just everything is about gifting and being a reciprocal relationship, because you tend the land then and you look after the land. They talk about the three sisters, corn, beans and squash, and how they grow and how each are dependent on each other. Yeah, and how the nitrates are made by the beans underground. And in the West, we do all the corn in great big long lines, and we come with machines and we take them down. But actually, they yield far more crop because they work in symmetry together. And it's just really, really interesting to be challenged and consider it in a different way. And I've been walking around since I found out, kind of feeling very light in my heart, feeling very full. In a very positive way. And I know if this is a complete introduction, people are thinking, oh, somebody's been hit with a hippie stick.
I like your hippie stick. It's fine. Look, I'm wearing a hippie van on my shirt.
I do think we got so disconnected, and that's why forest bathing is so amazing. And you don't have to hug a tree to appreciate the fact that actually they have conversations with each other. We know that they have conversations with each other. They send messages. Their trees keep their young small by putting reduce the amount of sunlight, because if the trees grow quickly, they grow weaker.
Yeah.
And they're not strong. And it's just the fact they have nurseries for trees blew my mind. It's like, and it's life lessons. I think we let our children grow up too quickly sometimes.
Yes. Well, they should be independent sooner. Right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, all back to independence.
Yeah.
And that's a game changer for our profession, because as I've seen you speaking about online and such too, that that foundation of that definition of OT is to improve people's independent engagement in meaningful occupation. And you're putting your hand up and saying, actually, we're social beings, and independence shouldn't be the goal.
No, well, they've actually changed the definition on the RCOT, our British site, because of my campaigns. Woohoo!
Yay!
literally wrote, everything we do, everything, that's a huge word, everything we do is about increasing independence and well-being. Those two things are not mutually exclusive. Actually, if you're too independent, you're not well.
Yeah.
And
it's often a trauma response.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And actually, I just think we really need to think very carefully. You go along to somebody, you say, I'm here to help you be independent. And we sell it like we're saviours. We're here to help you be independent. Da, 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 da. And what happens if they only get partially independent? Mm. And then you say things like, I hear people say things like, they wouldn't accept a care package, or they don't want equipment. Well, that's funny, because you went and told them that they ought to be independent and that was the best thing in the world. And guess what? Their alternative to that is dependent. And you look at the synonyms for dependent, and it's fragile, weak, a burden, all these awful words. Mm-hmm. And it's no wonder then we can't really work with people. And I like the book by Gaben Matei, the trauma specialist, the doctor. Mm-hmm. He did one called The Body Says No. And he talks about the link between inflammation in the body and all sorts of different conditions, and how any kind of condition that's got an inflammatory base, including Alzheimer's, rheumatoid arthritis, fibromyalgia, often there's a trauma background to these, where people have had all sorts of difficult times, had all sorts of difficult coping strategies. And it's not about, like, the criticism to that way of thinking is that people are therefore at fault of their condition, and that's not what's being said. Mm-hmm. What's being said is that because of their experience, their nervous system and their endocrine system and their immune system are reacting in different ways. And actually, if they're not given support and they're not kind of facilitated to be able to have support, then actually you're continuing to put pressure on the nervous system, their immunity and their hormone release. And we know, that the mere anticipation of a smile releases endorphins, reduces cortisol production. If you don't think you're going to see anyone who's going to make you smile for a whole week, how is that impacting on your endorphins? Yeah. And I'm not a fan of, smile through your tears or any of that kind of toxic positivity. We both discussed this. Yes. We're both very anti-toxic positivity.
And yet very positive humans, yet toxic positivity and not being authentic is a problem. Yes.
Yeah. But this idea that actually we're doing a disservice by telling people, to get on and buck up and all these sorts of things by society, and be productive and, work a 5-day week and don't take extra leave, and, all these sorts of things are just putting pressure on people who've already had trauma, already had difficulty, or actually we know that co-regulating those things would be much more helpful. But, people with rheumatoid arthritis, they've looked at the personality type, and people tend to get on and do and fight, and that's not a bad thing. But at the same time, they're less likely to take pain medication. And I worry that part of that is us saying independence, productivity, independence, productivity, independence, productivity. If that's the message we're sending, not take care of yourself, I worry that we are potentially adding to the burden of whatever the condition is. If there is a link, like they call it psychoneuroimmunoendocrinology, I think that's the bloody word.
That it makes me think of, I worked in chronic pain for some time, and persistent pain, I think we say more so now, but I think about, the secondary gain of pain and how this person's very pain focused. It's a negative thing. Let's help them be less pain focused. Well, the pain focus is actually seeking social connection and validation, right? It's seeking that sense of reciprocity and care where maybe it was missing. But if we teach them to be less pain focused and do the things, often it's occupational engagement that is improving a lot of things, but that criticism of that fundamental need for connection, and that the pain is the thing that gets connection, is it's completely different through this lens.
Yeah, it's worrying, isn't it? I think we're so judgmental of people.
Yeah.
I think we've just become so intolerant. And I try to check myself, because I am a quick to respond, but I've realised that I sometimes, if you heard the old phrase, you might not have it where you are, but other people load the bullet, but you shoot the gun.
No, I haven't heard that.
Oh, I will hear other people complain about something, and I realised it's something that's kind of come from my childhood, where I would be the one who sorted things out.
Yeah.
So I was the one who would do things. And I think I've just picked up this habit that other people complain about stuff and I go and sort it out. And other people load the bullet and I shoot the gun. And sometimes I can be
overfunctioning, right? It's
also harsh
with
it. Yeah. I can say things which I wouldn't normally say, because I believe in kind of being kinder. But I'll say something quite harsh or a bit kind of a dig, and actually it's not from me. It's from other people.
Yeah.
And it's something I've become aware of quite recently, where I've thought, actually, you didn't want to say that.
Yeah.
And actually it was because so-and-so, so-and-so, and so-and-so has been in your ear going, no, they do that. Or I sometimes get in preventatively because I know that somebody else is gonna go, and I'll go to stop it becoming a bigger issue. Do you know what I mean?
I totally do. I totally do.
I need to keep my nose out sometimes. I need to butt out and think, or I need to offer support in a different way. Like there's somebody I can think of at the moment that I just need to be more supportive of, and help them have an ally whilst they settle in, so they don't need to prove themselves.
Be able to sit in the muck with people. Yeah, allow them to be without trying to change. Yeah. And it's hard to do.
How you can become an instrument for somebody else without even realizing it.
Yes. How many times I open my mouth and my mom comes out, and it's like, wow, okay. My mom and I share a lot of values, but sometimes it's like, those are actually her words. Yeah, there they are. Yeah, it's interesting. Wow.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah. And there's that, I mean, I know you're a big mindfulness practitioner, and I think there's that sense of the more mindful and aware we are, the more we can create a pause between stimulus and response and be intentional in our responses. We're always going to be human and have reactions, of course, but being able to pause and go, actually, maybe I sit back and allow this to play out, and I don't need to jump to change. And perhaps this person making a complaint is not a request for me to do something, though that's how I interpret it as a human giver. Yeah.
There's always other ways to respond, isn't there? And just knowing there's different ways to respond. I think it's being aware of your responses. Just being aware. I think that happens with age. You suddenly start to think, well, a bit like the independence thing. You know, you think, well, if it's not all about independence, I wonder what else. I wonder if there's anything else I could have a little pick at and pull a thread and see whether the cloak falls apart.
Curiously, in the name of science.
All about science, obviously.
Did you, in your reading, did you come across interbeing the way Thich Nhat Hanh describes it?
I haven't.
So I pulled up a little, it really aligns with this. And so one writing that he wrote was, let's see, I mean, it's written in 2017. I think he died about a year ago. Interbeing. So he says, about 30 years ago, I was looking for an English word to describe our deep interconnection with everything else. I liked the word togetherness, but I finally came up with the word interbeing. The verb to be can be misleading because we cannot be by ourselves alone. To be is always to interbe. If we combine the prefix inter with the verb to be, we have a new verb, interbe. To interbe and the action of interbeing reflects reality more accurately. We inter-are with one another and with all life. And he goes on to talk about all of the elements and nature and humans, but it sounds really aligned with this sense of the indigenous cultures. And I mean, he's Vietnamese, I believe. And so thinking about around the world, and then we can get into Jung, and we could have a whole 5-hour conversation, but I think it's really, really cool. All the things you're talking about and the way you inspire these OTs, these up and coming OTs, and inspire OTs around the world. I love how brave you are to step out and speak your truth and challenge things. Be a not a well-behaved woman, because you are making an impact, and I thank you for that. You are changing things on a grand scale, and I very much appreciate your mission and you just being you, because you're hilarious. We didn't even get to humor.
Well, we had lots of laughs.
We do have lots of laughs.
And we've learned more about the Irish.
What does being brave mean to you?
Oh, that's a good question. I haven't really thought about that.
I should have asked you in advance to consider it.
Do you know, on the things that we've talked about today, I think being brave is often considered adopting somebody else's superhero-ness. Is that, I know it's not a word as such, but I wonder whether being brave is actually really looking at yourself and considering you on a really, really, really kind of deep level in your relationships, and being willing to question them, improve them, see where you've been wrong, start again, refresh. And I wonder, sometimes we have a tendency to move on when actually there's a lot of growth that can happen through repair.
Thank you for that. I love that. Love that. How would you like people to connect with you?
Ooh, through chocolate. No, I'm joking.
You have a Facebook group?
And Facebook, Facebook group. We've got the Belonging Centre practice, but also I'm laughing OT on Twitter.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the Facebook group is the Belonging Movement, right? Is that the proper name if people are searching it?
I'm glad you said that, because I couldn't quite remember.
I went looking for it. You said you're in the group, and I went and I looked for it and went, oh, there's a belonging group. Oh, there you are. Yes.
There's the Belonging Movement. That's right.
Belonging Movement. Yes. And you're quite
cool, in case they want to be involved in my research.
And the Laughing OT on Twitter.
Yes. Oh, just laughing at. I'm laughing OT. Yeah.
I love it. I love it. Well, thank you so much for being here, and thanks for being my first interview.
Thank you very much for having me. I feel like I've come to your house for dinner. Thank you very much for having me.
My pleasure. We'll have to sew a little bit here.
Sorry. Thank you. You're an absolute star. Well done. Congratulations on your new podcast.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And obviously you're doing a fantastic service helping us out there, because we need to be inspired. We need to be inspired and question, and having resources like this is so helpful. I can direct my students to you now.
I think that you and I messaged back and forth a while when I was trying to come up with names, and I wrote out all the values and all of the things that I want to represent, and it's always broad and complicated, and like a spider diagram. I think in a spider diagram, or swirls. I never think in a linear fashion. But when I look at how I'd like to inspire people, I think it is to be brave, to take risks, to understand that that's going to be uncomfortable. There's going to be fear involved. Not everybody's going to like it. And that sense of curious exploration and questioning things and trying things and learning from our mistakes, that's brave. Brave isn't the absence of fear. It's embracing the discomfort of innovation and trying things and exploration. And I love how you brought to this that courage to be yourself, and bring yourself to the table, bring yourself to your connections and relationships. And that is the bravest thing of all, because I think we're often trying to be someone else.
Everyone else is taken. You can only be yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it.
Now, if you enjoyed this episode, I invite you to connect with both Alice and I on your platforms of choice. Alice has a Facebook group called The Belonging Movement, and you can find her on Twitter as Laughing OT. I have a Facebook group called OTs Rising Together, and you can find me mostly on Facebook at Carlin OT Coach. Thanks for listening. I can't wait to hear how you like this.